with this evolution, we want people to start thinking more about, how can we be different? What can we do to make us unique? Because there are so many podcasts out there. But here's the thing: podcasting is still so new. Like, if you think about it, there's 200 million podcasts out there right now. 800,000 of them are active, right? There's 600 million blogs that are currently out there right now. We're only at the tip of the iceberg with what podcasting can do. And so what we try to do with our brands is, think outside of the box. So our first step that we do with every exercise, when we bring on a new client, we do an onboarding session. Obviously, we go through the nuts and bolts of how to create the podcast, but the first thing we do is an audience exercise. So essentially, it's just like a digital whiteboard that we'll go through, and we'll just start writing down things that describe their audience, right? And by the end of this exercise, we should have somewhere of like 9 to 10, adjectives that describe their audience.
You're listening to the Rich State of Mind Show, the podcast made to make you the total package in the entrepreneurial world and give you what we call a rich state of mind. If you are here looking to learn about real estate investing, marketing, elevating your business, and developing your mindset to get to the next level, then you are at the right place. Stay tuned and be sure to join our community on richstateofmind.com. Now here's your host, Anthony Ritchie.
Hey, TJ, thank you so much for taking the time for this episode. Like I was saying before we started recording, we are talking about podcasting. We are talking about branding, but we're going to attack some questions and give some answers on what our audience may have had after listening to a couple of our other episodes. So if you could please just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Anthony. So my name is TJ Bonaventura. I am a co-founder of StudioPod Media, a full service production company focusing on podcasting here in San Francisco. We work with clients all across the globe now, which is fun to say. Mostly working with individuals and organizations trying to up-level their podcasts more from like a brand awareness exercise versus a monetization exercise. So I've been in the space now for 2.5, 3 years. Originally came up with the idea when I was living in New York in 2016, 2017, tried to do a podcast with a buddy at the time, and who was living in San Francisco, and just realized it was really, really tough. Like, I didn't really know like what equipment to buy, who my audience was, how to edit, how to post it, all these things. And I realized, there's got to be a market for something out there where, someone can be able to talk about what they want to talk about, no matter where you're coming from, whether that's an individual or a brand, and hand it off to somebody to help execute it. And there, fast forward about two years later, StudioPod was born. And so ever since then, I brought on my co-founder, Julian, and we built a team of around 20, 25 people who are helping produce these podcasts for these mostly organizations. While we do work with individuals, it's mostly with organizations.
Is that by design, or is that just what you happen to attract?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I knew that there was a market for organizations to get into it. At the time in 2016, 2017, even 2018, podcasting was still so much in its infancy, or its toddlership, if you will. So, it had legs, it was walking around, talking around a little bit, but didn't know its own personality yet. And now it's still growing to an aspect, but I knew businesses were going to get into it. I just knew it. It was too intimate of a medium. It was too, excuse me, it was too interesting for marketers to want to do podcasting, because they built this brand loyalty through, the auditory experience. You could just listen. There's people out there who are religious, with their podcasting. I'm sure you have audience members that are, religious with yours. We do with ours. Once you find that podcast, you feel like the host. And so that is so important for brands to have that sort of relationship with their customer, with their audience. And so, being in the Bay Area, it's a major tech scene. There's a lot of forward-thinking individuals out here who want to take chances, and the cost it takes to pay a company like StudioPod to build your podcast or help build your podcast is just a drop in the bucket for what a typical marketing budget is for a CMO, especially here in the Bay Area.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Especially in the Bay Area. And so I want to kind of break it down to bare bones. And so obviously podcasting helps with brand, else with awareness of whatever, whatever business that you're trying to put out. And some people just do it just because, but for more of a business aspect, what is branding? I talked about earlier, how, when people say building a brand, it's such a very ambiguous phrase that it kind of leaves you lost. Like, all right, I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And we kind of use social media as an example. That's the first thing people would think about. But if you could kind of break that down to what that is and how it can help.
Yeah, the way I think about it is it's an experience in the form of like a personality, if you
Okay.
will. When you go to a site or when you go to someone's social media presence, you need to experience something. You need to get a feel of what their personality is, and they're not trying to sell you something, even if that's their main goal is to drive revenue through the act of sales. When we built our site, I want someone to come in and feel like there is a comfortability. They get the presence or the personality of both Julian and myself, as co-founders. What are we trying to do? For us, our mission statement is to, empower through audio, but does that really help anybody when they come to the site? And again, I'm just using this as an example, but from a branding perspective, like you need to feel something. I know that sounds kind of hyperbole, but you really do need to feel something, whether it's your favorite pop culture website, or maybe it's going to browse Netflix or browse HBO Max or whatever it may be. You want to know what you're going to get when you are interacting with that brand. You need to have that distinct personality. If you don't have that, then you're kind of just like in this weird limbo land, and it's your audience isn't going to know what to expect, and they won't think of you when they have that gut reaction of whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. So if you don't have that strict personality, you're not providing that experience, then you don't really have a brand. It's good to make bets, in my opinion. Like if you think that it's you're using aggressive wording, if that is appropriate for what you're trying to sell, like go for it. I mean, you saw there was, what was it, Dollar Shave Club years ago, who had that weird, YouTube video that went viral because they were just being outlandish and they weren't really talking about shaving, but of course it went viral, and all of a sudden now they became worth millions and millions of dollars and eventually got acquired by, I think it was Unilever. And so taking chances is really important. You just don't want to be too aggressive, in my opinion, but it is important to, really make a bet with, what is the personality and experience that you're trying to accomplish.
And so, I guess in a short way, it's just creating a unique relationship. When I look at, when I think about podcast editing, I want to think about TJ.
Mm-hmm.
Or your
yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, of course. I mean, it's not even more about just, I want people to think about when you think of like podcast storytelling, right? When like, oh, I have something to say and I want to build a narrative around it. And it's not much about editing. It's about just the whole production. Like that's where we want people to think about StudioPod.
And so how do you help people leverage their podcast into creating a personal brand and, growing an audience?
Yeah, that's the, the $1 million question, right? So podcasting, if we just take a couple steps back, right? If we just talk about the evolution of podcasting, where it just started as, two people just getting on a mic and just talking about something that they're passionate about, but it's so much more now, right? It's become, you see, the serials of the world that came out in 2016 just completely changed the game of what you could do from an auditory experience, through the act of podcasting. So now we're seeing audiobooks in the form of podcasting. We're seeing the lines blurred with audiobooks. And you could just look at guys like David Goggins and Malcolm Gladwell. If you listen to their audiobooks, you wouldn't be able to tell if it's an audiobook or a podcast or a radio show, for that matter. But now with this evolution, we want people to start thinking more about, how can we be different? What can we do to make us unique? Because there are so many podcasts out there. But here's the thing, podcasting is still so new. Like if you think about it, there's 200 million podcasts out there right now. 800,000 of them are active, right? There's 600 million blogs that are currently out there right now. We're only at the tip of the iceberg with what podcasting can do. And so what we try to do with our brands is, think outside of the box. So our first step that we do with every exercise, when we bring on a new client, we do an onboarding session. Obviously we go through the nuts and bolts of how to create the podcast, but the first thing we do is an audience exercise. So essentially it's just like a digital whiteboard that we'll go through, and we'll just start writing down things that describe their audience. right? And by the end of this exercise, we should have somewhere like 9 to 10, adjectives that describe their audience.
Okay.
And then from there, we narrow it down into, maybe 2 or 3. And this is a long exercise. Like I'm definitely diluting this right here.
Yeah.
This is a long exercise we go through. And then once we get down to the 2 or 3 adjectives, right, these are your main purposes. This is the whole reason why you're doing this, right? This should be in line with your brand. This should be in line with every guest you have. This should be in line with every episode you have. If you were going to do a blog post, if you're going to do a social media post, if you're going to be doing any sort of ancillary content that's going to tie into this particular the show that you're creating, it should tie back to these 2 or 3 adjectives that describe your audience. So the way we think about it is the show or the series is your sun, right? Is the sun. And then all the ancillary different content you're creating are the planets orbiting the sun.
Okay.
Right. So you want to make sure that everything that you're doing is going to tie back to what the show is creating. We're really trying to change the narrative around downloads is the end all be all for what you're trying to create. Because there's so many podcasts out there, it's getting difficult to earn your audience. And, a lot of advertisers will, and I'm sure you know this, Anthony, like, they will only pay you on CPMs, which is cost per milli. So essentially cost per 1,000 downloads. And advertisers don't even really want to interact with you unless you have around 10,000 an episode. And for an individual who's starting a podcast, that's a lot. You need, unless you have a large following, unless you have just a killer like paid game that you are willing to spend, which a lot of people don't, you're not going to see those numbers for a long, long time. We're talking like 1 or 2 years. So what we try to do is be very focused with who your audience is. Because if the more focused your audience is, and the data is getting better behind it right now, there's still so much unknown what's going on with podcasting and audience figures. But once you can kind of start to figure out who your audience is through those other ancillary pieces of content, this becomes way more attractive to advertisers, because now you can reach out and say, listen, this is specifically the type of people that I'm getting, listening to my show. And so what will happen is that cost per milli will go up. So people will pay you more per download, but you won't need as much. So even if you're getting like 2,000-3,000 downloads an episode, that's going to be more valuable to a advertiser who is just kind of throwing shit against the wall and hoping it sticks. And then, but they don't know if their audience is right for that advertiser, if that makes sense.
So I can definitely relate. So I have one, directory that's telling me, I'm pulling in, 25 to 3,000 downloads per episode. Then I got one that's saying I'm pulling in 100. Mm-hmm. And then, so like, if I'm trying to, submit this to somebody who I wanted to advertise on, and they charge me per, or I charge them per CPM, it is a hard sell. Like, all right, well, which one's which? And so that does tell me how, podcasting is still in its maturing tadpole phase, right? Where we're trying to centralize. I really they need to have like a centralized, no crap, this is what your statistics are. But I know that's gonna be a long time from now, especially with so many podcasts out there and so many different ways you can so many different feeds you could put your directories, you could put your podcast. So one day though, and whoever is listening, maybe you'll create the software or website that will have the accurate statistics on that. But I like the way you broke that down, especially with not focusing so much on how many downloads, but identifying your audience and, appeasing to them. Are you hitting their wickets? Because, word of mouth, the more you make them happier, word of mouth will spread to like-minded individuals, assuming that these people are hanging out with people that are like them or think like them. And then that's how your audience can grow. And you'll have loyal people listening to your podcast, versus maybe the onesie-twosies that, clicked on your episode because they like the title. And so I like that approach. I really do. And you're the first person to break that down like that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's a couple of problems with podcasting right now. One is going to be discoverability, right? Because of this RSS feed, which is such an antiquated technology. We're talking about something that was developed like 30 years ago, which in, the tech world, that is beyond old, right? So without the discoverability, you have to just really focus on who your audience is and then who you're going to be pushing it out to outside of podcasting, if that makes sense, because then you want to draw them back in. So having a really good website where you have a place where people can go and subscribe. Maybe if you transcribe every episode, that's a great way to do some SEO. A lot of people don't do that right now. One, you should do it for accessibility. So for people who are hard of hearing, but two, you should do it because it really does help your SEO. And then there you can tie in a player, whatever uh, distributor you're using or whatever hosting platform, they should have a player that you can just embed directly in your website. Not only does that count towards your listens, if you want to give it to an advertiser, it just makes it very easy, because there is actually a large amount of people who still listen on the desktop web and not just through mobile, which is still shocking to me.
That's actually the bulk of my listens is web browser.
Yeah. So so you want to make sure you have an online presence there. That's just more than just, putting it on Spotify and Apple and any other major players. So there's a lot that you can do with it. You just want to make sure that there's a call to action and people can easily, find, what you're talking about in your show notes. You have your transcription, you have your blog post, you have, all these other, again, beating a dead horse here, but these ancillary content pieces that are going to tie people back to not only that episode, but, maybe future episodes.
And so do you believe, it sounds like you believe in kind of laying out, not necessarily who you may be interviewing, but maybe having like a chart, some type of plan of what topics you want to cover in order to speak to your audience.
Yeah, definitely. I think you need to have an approach with every guest.
There we go. Okay.
And I mean that in the sense of you need it for your audience. For example, me being on the show, like I reached out to you, I wanted to be on the show, I love your show, but does it make sense for you to have me on the show? Obviously you vetted me and you're like, you know what, this is going to bring value to my audience because he can talk about the intersection of branding and podcasting and how that provides value to your audience, right? Like this isn't because, I can go down a rabbit hole. I used to work in, I used to work in sports radio. I used to work as a tech bro here in Silicon Valley. I could talk about many different experiences, but that's not going to be valuable to your audience. The reason why I'm going to be valuable is because I can talk about the experience of podcasting and what we do for our clients and how they value, our knowledge to make their podcast just up level to the next spot. And that's something that we tell every single one of our clients to do. And we actually get to the point where like we have, every show that we do that we create, we put on a producer and a show coordinator. Show coordinator is just another way to say a project manager. And we make sure that every single guest, we have a project management tool that we use, but we want to make sure that when we find out who the guest is, we are being annoyingly so that we will ask, what is the value of this guest? What are they bringing? Are they trying to be X, Y, and Z adjectives to your show? So as an example, we have a show that we are rebooting called the Pod on Podcast, where we give tips on podcasting, right? It is for the curious and scrappy podcaster. We do not have a guest on unless we think that the topic that we're going to be discussing and their value as a guest is going to be important to the curious and scrappy podcaster. And that's the first question we always ask. And so for some people, it's going to be more about entrepreneurials and, value selling. Maybe it's going to be about storytelling and investing, whatever it may be. Like we want to make sure that those guests are always going to fit into what our client is trying to achieve. Otherwise, you're going to be so broad with the type of conversations that you're having that you're just going to lose your audience within the first like 10, 20 minutes, because they're going to be like, I don't know what this podcast is about.
Yeah.
And so I just don't want to time in. Their time is valuable.
Yeah, you're right. And so some people are able to get away. Like Joe Rogan, he'll have somebody on his podcast. One will be talking about, Tai Chi, and then the other one will be talking about, politics. So he's able to kind of get away with it. But for the most part, it has to be, very specific to a particular niche or some type of mission. And your mission, whether you want to say it's your mission statement or your approach, has to be very clear so that people don't feel like, I don't know what this guy's going to come up with next Monday. It's a hit or miss, right? Hey, I know that this person is every week they're going to be talking about this particular topic. And so that was a kind of a struggle that my wife and I, when we were thinking about the podcast, I'm like, okay, rich state of mind. What does that entail? How can we make that clear what we're trying to do? And then, so even though I could talk about podcasting and then we'll talk about real estate investing, I always try to branch it together with like entrepreneurship, being a well-balanced individual. And when I say well-balanced, when it comes to success, I don't think you can be balanced. There's definitely at some point you're putting in a lot of work and then things will pan out. But at least, as you're going through these steps of entrepreneurship or branding or anything business, that who who to talk to for what, because you're not going to be the expert in everything. And that's what we try to, that's our approach for this podcast. So yes, I have something I want to talk about, but I am not a project manager. I cannot edit podcasts. I'm not good with production, but I could talk about a particular product or, or topic. That's my gift. And then, I know I can go to TJ for X, Y, and Z. I know I can go to the other episode we talked about where for my booking, talk to the CFO, because now we're gaining revenue. So that's what we try to, that's our approach with it, and try to help make sure that everybody is well-rounded. And I think you explained that perfectly. And you kind of reminded me that what I need to keep doing myself as well, and not get away from that.
Yeah, there's a couple things that to unpack there and think about. One, whenever a client comes to us and says we want to be the Joe Rogan, we're like red flag right away. He's an anomaly. He's been doing it. He's been doing it for 10 years. He has an audience, and he is eccentric, and he's awesome, and he has good stuff. He has bad stuff. More power to him, because he's helped, really change the podcasting game, and we're grateful for it. However, he does talk a lot about a lot of different stuff in a lot of different arenas, and that's just not a recipe for success in today's podcast world, in my mind. Now, if you wanted to be like, you know what, I want to be the Joe Rogan of, real estate investment, and I can talk about anything when it comes to real estate investment, then that's a little bit more interesting, because now you're narrowing the focus a little bit more. Now you're going to lose a lot of people who you may be able to talk about a lot of other business aspects. But know what, if that's what the focus of what you want to do, and I don't mean you, and just a hypothetical situation, but no, that's more interesting to us, because now we can really focus all of our energy to talk about, these guests that are going to be relevant to, the conversations you're going to be having with anybody who's going to be interested in real estate investing.
And so we talked, a little bit about it as far as, regarding CPM and, having to show how much how many audience downloads you get per episode in order to present to somebody that you want to get a little bit of cash from. And so what are some other ways that people can earn money? When's the right time to say, hey, now it's time to monetize your podcast?
So here's the great thing. You can start monetizing at any level, even if you just started. What I would recommend anybody doing is, once you go through that, that audience exercise, making sure that you have an approach, and you start building out a plan, a SMART goal, if you will. If you don't know what SMART goals are, look that up. You can maybe throw them in there. That's a whole nother that's a whole nother segment we can go down to. But when you set that up and having a plan, have a goal, have, these objectives of what you're trying to do. And then what you can start to do soon after you have a couple episodes under your belt, and let's say you've batch recorded or you've batch produced, meaning you've done a bunch of episodes before you released them, then you can start pitching these and giving them to whether it could be anybody who's going to pay for the advertising, from a title sponsorship, if you will. Title sponsorship is, okay, for season 1, I'm doing 8 episodes, or let's call it 15 or 20 or whatever. And I want to sell the title spot to this brand or product or, organization, because I think their values tie in with mine. Once you do that, then you can start building all the different types of content. Now you can say you have a title sponsor for your show, right? So it's a good thing to show that you are sponsored, because then it gives you a little bit more, gives your show a little bit more juice, if you will. The other part of it is, maybe you don't want your show to be giving you revenue through downloads. Maybe that's not your thing, right? Which is totally okay. Maybe you are providing a service, and you want people to know that they can go to your service through the podcast, meaning that you have a call to action at the end of each episode, or whenever someone listens, they know that you are an expert in X, Y, and Z. And so you want to bring them to their website, to your website, so then they can ultimately go through the purchase funnel and ultimately make that conversion. Yeah. Now, for brands, it's a little bit different, though, and we can go into that in a little bit. But like brands, it's a completely different than an individual. And I know you're probably your audience probably is a little bit mixed, because there's entrepreneurs who are building their own brands, and entrepreneurs who want to use podcasting as their own voice to bring people back to their site.
And so, you're right. And there is a little bit of both. And like I said, when it comes to this topic in particular, I think everybody's like, give me more information. I need more, because I'm trying to figure out how can I break that bubble, or become the Joe Rogan of podcasting. You talked a little bit about the sales funnel, which again is a whole nother topic, but definitely something to look into when it comes to converting your listeners into customers, or whatever service you're trying to push them towards. When it comes to accepting a sponsor or accepting somebody that you plan to advertise, what are your thoughts on receiving people that do not align with maybe who your audience is? So like, let's say I talk about real estate investing and I have somebody who wants to sell auto insurance, but they're willing to pay me good money. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I know where you're going with this, and it's always hard to turn down when someone's looking to give you money, right? That's always really difficult, especially if it's your first one. And this is why I'm kind of the anti-dynamic ads in podcasting. They're getting better, which is good. I definitely land on the side of, you want to get an advertiser that aligns with your audience. Like, listen, I'm already one of those people who don't like ads in general. I'm a fast forward through them, but they're getting programmatically smarter, especially on Spotify. There are a lot of good services out there that will help you find advertisers that align with your audience. That's why it's important to do the audience exercise at the beginning there. Now, everybody needs to make some money. Podcasting is not an inexpensive hobby. If you're trying to do it as a hobbyist, it's not inexpensive to do, even if you're trying to make money off of it. There's a reason why whenever you listen to a lot of the more famous or popular podcasts out there, at the end of it, they list off 10 people, because there's 10 people that are working on it, right? And that costs money. Yeah. And if your goal is to drive revenue through the podcast itself, you want to make sure that you're going to be in line, because, at the end of the day, if you have the right audience and you are hitting the right advertisers who want that right audience, guess what? And they see some sort of conversions, because they can track it, whether it's through some sort of like affiliate link or whatever it may be. Your advertiser is going to pay you more, because you're bringing them to their sales funnel, and they're seeing some sort of value of your show.
No, and thank you for that. It's kind of a setup question, but I think people needed to kind of hear that. I initially felt like, all right, I just need to make money because I need to pay for my subscription, my podcast subscription that I have, so that I can be at least break even. But then as I gained an audience, as I realized who the people that were listening to my show, I realized they don't want to hear anything about diapers. They came here to listen to my podcast about entrepreneurship. And then if I do an ad, it has something to do with developing them towards that. So let's say if I talk about real estate investing, and if I did an ad about property managing software, Avail.co or Build Them, then that would help them in their real estate investing journey. And then obviously if I have an affiliate link, that would obviously help my conversion, so on and so forth. So I think if you're going to do it, then definitely let it, it's got to make sense, and it stays true to what you're doing. You don't sound like I think people are really big on, especially if they're loyal, they're really big on like you sold out, you weren't loyal.
It's commonplace right now. A lot of times, like, I don't know about you, but when I listen to a podcast and I hear that there's a advertiser on it, one that's relevant, I find it more I don't know. I just find it more credible, if you will. And I think that's important to do, especially, but I also understand like the intricacies of like, if you're doing it versus a brand. If I'm listening to one of our branded podcasts and they have, an advertiser in the middle of them, like, this doesn't make any sense. Why is the brand trying to make money, even though they, have hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue each year? Like, why are they trying to do this? That's a completely different conversation. Now, the one thing that I do want to say though, for your audience, there are so many marketers out there who want to get into podcast advertising because it is such a valuable asset for them to use in such a minimal investment on their end, but they don't know how to get in. Like, they feel like they need to go with the big players out there. They feel like they need to just like, pay all this money to be part of like these different networks that are going to eventually put them in their podcasting. You would be shocked if there's a brand that you like that aligns with your audience. You would be shocked how willing they would be to give you just 5, 10, sometimes 20K for a year's worth of episodes. Oh, wow. Like, you would be shocked. Now, don't get me wrong. you're going to have to give them value of what you're trying to provide, your audience, your numbers. You're going to have to give them some sort of, tangible stuff that they can look at, but they would be willing to make that investment. I promise you.
I'm glad you said that, because again, with the whole Joe Rogan, everybody knows how much money he made off of Spotify. So everybody's looking for that big deal. But there are networks that would provide something like that. And it's a smaller chunk that people that, it's easier to be like, all right, I can attain this. Because a good comparison is, I talk about real estate syndications. Fairly recently, we've been talking about real estate syndication on this podcast, because we start off with small real estate investments, and now we're up to talking about buying 500 unit apartment buildings. And so somebody listening to my podcast for the first time, that 500 unit building sounds like a monster. But there was somebody I had just talked to. I can't remember if it's already posted or I just talked to him. I just recorded it. So it hasn't come out yet, where he talked about his first syndication was only 13 units. It was still a syndication. It was just 13 units. They didn't do the 100 unit, 200 unit one until later down the road. And so you've came up with it. You've talked to my audience about a smaller version that can kind of get their confidence up, get their feet, get them rolling, and possibly, snowball from there. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, of course. Everything's going to be, a crawl, walk, run approach, right? You need to start small and then understand like where you're, where you excel. Maybe you did a couple episodes, you're like, you know what, this is kind of boring. I want to do a little bit more of like a 2-segment style show. That's the great thing about podcasting. If you don't like the style of your show, guess what? Your audience probably isn't going to like it either. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, feel free to like test things out and try something new. Like that stuff is going to catch people's attention. If you're like, you know what, I want to do, every third episode, I want to do a solo episode that's going to be 15 minutes and it's going to talk about, X, Y, and Z. Guess what? You're going to find people that are going to tune in just to hear that 15-minute episode. And guess what? Maybe after a year, like, you know what? I'm going to go exclusively 15 minutes because one, it's easier to produce and my audience likes it more. Yeah. Again, these are just examples, but you're never going to know unless you test it out. And you can see the download numbers, or you can use like surveys or SurveyMonkey or, different types of tools out there to understand, which ones are more appeasing to your audience.
I love it. And so we talked about monetization. We talked about building an audience, or at least trying to make sure that your approach to your audience is very specific so they know what to expect. And then you will grow from there. What's the next step after that in order to make sure you don't have, what do they call it? Podcast fatigue, where kind of when you start off high and you just fizz out. Pod fade. There you go.
Yeah. So for anyone that doesn't know, pod fade is essentially the act of just kind of falling off. And right now, the average podcast, believe it or not, lasts 7.5 episodes before it goes down, because a lot of people don't know how much time that goes into it. And people think, oh, I'm interesting. We hear this all the time. Oh, I'm really interesting. I want to start a podcast. I'm going to get millions of downloads. I'm going to get hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from just talking. No, that doesn't happen. That just doesn't happen. The number one thing you can do is just be consistent. Don't get too head over your skis. Really plan out what you're trying to do. If you can be consistent with the style of show, if you can be consistent with the length of the show, if you can be consistent with the production of it, no matter how little or how much you're going to be doing, and that's going to be something that's going to make it easier. Dedicate, the same day every week to do recordings. Dedicate the same day every week to do the editing. Outsource it if you can. These are the things that are going to keep the ball rolling. Lex Friedman, Jordan Harbinger, these types of people who are very successful podcast hosts, they're on the record of saying you need, almost 2 years worth of content to start making real waves within the podcast industry, to start getting revenue, which is crazy. So that's, if you think about 2 years, that's 100 episodes if you do one a week, right? Start to think about, how you're going to be able to build and trying to find the different individuals who would be good on your show, because that consistency will not, and then here's the thing, it may not correlate directly to the downloads and then getting money from it. But you know what? You'll have a catalog of shows. So then when you have that opportunity, when that, individual, or maybe you have a guest who is connected with somebody else, or maybe when you want to reach out to that brand, guess what? You have a, 30 episodes, 40 episodes, 50 episodes, 80 episodes that you can be like, hey, this is exactly what we're talking about. And maybe you'll get feedback from the advertiser and be like, you know what, this is good. We want to advertise, but can you like cut it down a little bit? Or can we do a title sponsorship? Can we do a call to action? Can we do an affiliate link? Whatever it may be. Like, don't don't say anything is off the table. Like, you want to make sure that you're staying consistent with what you're doing, because once you have that one blip, it's going to be easier to just have more and more blips down the road. You're like, oh, I missed a week, so whatever, I can miss another week. Then that's how the pod fade happens. It's an opposite. You built that whole, train track going up, but you know what? You didn't make it over the hill, so now you're falling backward. It's okay if you have a little blip. Just make sure you keep going with it.
Thank you, TJ, for breaking that down. I really have liked this episode personally, obviously, because I podcast and I still feel like I'm a brand/marketing newbie. I've definitely learned a lot. Those that create uh, websites, those that create that relationship between the customer and the brand, or business to business or business to customer concept. It is not as easy as some people may think. I think they kind of look at the overnight successes and use that and not realize that that's the exception and not the rule to this business. And it's to be respected, and I like it. It's not to be discouraging, but it's to encourage to do it the right way, and you will learn a lot of things throughout that time frame. And I truly believe that in this business, when you do it right and you do it, let's say, not necessarily slow, but you do it at a steady pace, you learn, so that when you get to the top, you don't automatically, your house is not built out of glass or like cards. You built it with brick versus that person that made it really quick and they're not prepared. So I like this process. I love how you have, like I told you before we even did this podcast, I was like, instantly my trust was, my trust was to you as far as how your website was set up, how you've situated and produced those other podcasts. I love some of their cover arts, by the way. I'm like, dang, that's really nice. So
that's Julian. That's I'm creative when it comes to, like, I'm one of those guys when I can hear a show, I can start drawing it and developing the, what it's going to look like in a visual setting. Mm-hmm. My co-founder, Julian, he's the mastermind behind developing those cover arts. He's got the creativity behind there, and he takes a lot of pride in that. So I can't.
That's awesome. And so I'd like to end it off with my final question. And it's what we asked, what do you consider your rich state of mind? What is your big why as to why you want to do this? And clearly you're successful in it. You have a passion for it. So what's your big why?
Yeah. So, I mean, it kind of just goes in line with our mission statement, and, it's to empower through audio. And what that means is we're just trying to up level the audio experience for, I am for anybody. I want to lower the barrier of entry for podcasting. I don't care if you have hundreds of millions of dollars you can spend, or you have a major audience, or you're just somebody, you're a middle school kid who just wants to get started and, wants to evolve their experience in the form of audio. Like, we really want to lower the barrier to entry. We want to empower our audio. In fact, one of our services, we give 30% of our revenue to the women's audio mission here in San Francisco. So I know those are for women and non-binary individuals who are looking to get in podcasting in the audio space, because the representation right now of those individuals in the space is like less than 5%, which is just like, honestly, just not acceptable. So, we are really just trying to up level, their experiences and get them into exposure where they would not normally see it.
Awesome. That's actually pretty cool that you do that. That's pretty awesome, actually. Thank you for sharing that, TJ. And we really appreciate you being up here. It's been a blast. Like I said, personally, and also for the audience. And I hope, and I'll put in the show notes the other episodes that they need to listen to as well, so that it'd be kind of like a three-peat. One of them was a bonus episode with Mike Cavagioni. The other one was, I think, episode 73 with Darren Saul. And then this one, TJ, when we put this one out, I definitely want them to hear this one as well. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and anybody who wants to know about podcasting, feel free to reach out to us, StudioPodMedia.com. While we are in San Francisco, we work with everybody. And then we're actually I'll give you guys a sneak peek too, and then we'll hook you up with a code. We have this service called the Starter Pack, where anybody can come in and just learn more about podcasting. We can do consulting, just like a 30-minute phone call here and there, or you can download these 12 snackable videos that are under 4 minutes just to learn like how to get started. And that's podon.fm. We'll create a code for you, Anthony, and then we'll put that in the show notes, or you can put that in the show notes. I don't want to do anything on your behalf. And then people can sign up, man. We want to help anybody who's trying to get into podcasting or answer any questions.
I'm pretty sure you're used to saying that. You're used to saying that we'll put it in for you based off your services. Well, also, thanks, TJ. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Good luck with all your future success. I know you're going to have it with this. This is a great show, and I can't wait to hear more episodes.
Thank you for sticking with us from the start of the episode. Please share our show with friends and family, visit our YouTube channel, and view more of our content on richstateofmind.com. See you next week on the Rich State of Mind Show.